What's up, everybody? Welcome to the 3 and Out YouTube page. I'm John Middlekauff, and we are talking football all day, every day. Make sure you subscribe, like the video, share it with your friends. Let's roll, baby. Okay, let's do a little Middlekauff mailbag. And that's where I answer your questions. At John Middlekauff is the Instagram handle. So just fire into those DMs and get your question answered here on this little podcast. This is from Chris. Longtime listener, first-time writer. Hypothetically speaking, if the NFL did a redraft, how many quarterbacks would go off the board before another position? I personally believe it'd be around 20 get picked before a non-quarterback. My friends think I'm crazy. So you don't mean a redraft. You just mean like an expansion draft. Every player's available. I think 100% there are 5 guys in some order going. Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, Joe Burrow, Justin Herbert are in the first 5 picks. I would bet $50,000 on that. I don't know the exact order, but those would be the first 5 players. Then I think it would start being debatable, right? Trevor Lawrence, Jalen Hurts, Kyler Murray, Brock Purdy, Dak Prescott's of the world. Would you take all those guys before you took another position? I think that's where the debate would really kick up. Who am I missing? You have this new group of guys that were just drafted. Caleb Williams. If we're doing it today, I would add Caleb Williams to that. And I'm not saying obviously we have no clue if he's as good as those top 5 guys, but the potential. Caleb Williams will get drafted ahead of Trevor Lawrence. I'm pretty confident on that. Again, money not factoring in. I'm just saying draft the player. I think you would have a handful of guys that you would start debating, right? If you were in the draft room and like 8 quarterbacks went, you're like, do we want Micah Parsons, Nick Bosa, Justin Jefferson? Just start going around the great players at different positions. Some of the great interior defensive linemen, Myles Garrett, TJ Watt. Would I take that guy over Dak Prescott? It's almost like a fantasy draft. Well, who could I get in the second round? Could I get, Kirk Cousins in the second round? Because I would rather have Kirk Cousins and Micah Parsons than Kyler Murray and, whoever, right? Max Crosby. Obviously, when you factor in age, like if Trent Williams was 25, I think if I didn't love the quarterback, I'd have no problem taking a Trent Williams-like player as my first pick. I don't think it would be 20. Stafford's a little older and banged up. Goff. I guess Goff. Guys like Goff and Dak and Purdy, they would just go. So maybe the number's like 12-ish. I would say 12-ish. I don't think we're getting to 20. Like you're taking Derek Carr over Micah Parsons or Nick Bosa. I don't think you could. I think Kyler's a wild card. I think Jalen Hurts is somewhat of a wild card. Well, he's got a big year coming up. Who am I missing? Tua. I wouldn't take Tua over any sweet defensive player. Like you're going to take Tua over TJ Watt? I'd be like Jerry West to the Warriors. Fire me. I quit. I'm out. It's a good question, though. One thing I'm going to do this summer, going to Tahoe for like a month. I got some good kind of evergreen podcasts that I was thinking of today in the car. And one of them, I'm going to do a little coach draft, I think. College and pro. Wanted to see if you know who Mike Francesa is. Yeah, I don't fucking live under a rock. I talk for a living. Yes, I know who he is. And if so, if you have ever had any sort of interaction or story with him. Being from New York, Francesa was our go-to sports guy for decades, and I imagine any listener of yours from the Northeast would know who he is. So wanted to see if you have any familiarity with him. Keep up the great work. P.S. Me and my buddy crack up find you mentioned atrocious McGlinchey contract. Someone DM'd me like a week ago. Was like, did McGlinchey sleep with your girlfriend or hurt your brother? I'm like, no, he's a good guy. I just think he's a pretty overpaid player. I've never been around or met Francesa, but I have several times when I was on radio, interviewed Chris Russo and talked to Chris Russo for a long time at a Super Bowl. And he is the coolest. And I didn't really listen to much Francesa, but as someone that has Sirius XM in his car, as we've known about my my Bluetooth issues in the Tahoe, I'm a Sirius XM loyalist. And Mad Dog Radio, obviously Russo's channel, I would say 10 years ago, I whenever I was in the car and I would stream it sometimes, it's probably a little too sporty for me now, that specific show, but early on I loved it. I would consider myself a diehard Chris Russo guy. He entertains. He is exactly what you want in this business, an entertainer. I never understand, like, you know who gets really mad a lot of times? You know, who used to be very envious of sports talk radio people 10, 15 years ago and called them lazy were newspaper writers. Well, there was a jealousy. You made way more in sports talk radio. And you were actually, I guess 20 years ago, the newspaper was bigger, but obviously sports talk radio really took off over the last 20 plus years. And there was such jealousy because they're like, that's not journalism. No, it's not journalism. This is a business. We're trying to make a lot of money. Our number one goal is to entertain the consumer. That's all anyone that's good at this job cares about. And Russo, to me, is an all-time elite entertainer. I don't watch First Take, but I respect, because I've met him a couple times, Stephen A., and he was cool as shit too. Listen, he's not for me, but he's obviously elite at his job. And I think him and Russo, they are just special personalities. And I've always said this, like, I like to be entertained. If you bore me in sports, I'll stop reading you. I won't listen to you. Like, I like to be entertained. I don't care if you're a little off the wall sometimes. I'm a fucking nut job, right? So, like, I like some off the wall takes, and Russo has them in spades. I think Russo, to me, if I did Mount Rushmore sports talk radio, for me, I mean, in my opinion, I'm not saying these are actually the greatest, but the influence on me and the people I listen to the most by a country mile would be Colin, Dan Patrick, Chris Russo, and Jim Rome. And honestly, there's probably not even a close fifth. There's not a close fifth. I mean, I started listening to Jim Rome when I was really young. And I think the coolest part about the way the internet and the world is now, how you can just consume anyone you want. You know, I can listen to a guy, I can stream a guy in New York. And I started doing this 10 years ago. You know, before, like, you knew about Colin or Dan Patrick because they were on ESPN, but these guys in local markets, you would never hear about them. And I remember the first time I started listening to Mad Dog, I'm like, Russo, this guy is a gem. Now, if he's breaking down the French Open, I'm changing the channel. Little too baseball heavy for me. I follow baseball. I don't watch it, but I know what's going on. I'm not breaking down seventh innings. And listen, I don't blame him for doing that. When he cut his teeth, talking baseball in sports talk radio was huge. And I just think those guys, I'd never listened to their show, but clearly they're one of the all-time great chemistry shows. And the thing is, with chemistry, with a radio host, like, you can't really fake it at the highest levels. And like, I loved Russillo and Scott Van Pelt, and that they were so unique because they were so much younger sounding than all these other shows. You know, Colin's show was always so different, which I liked because he talked money and business and obviously the analogies, but he didn't sound like anyone else. And to me, Jim Rome was just so early on it, but he was just very, very sports meat and potatoes. You know, Dan is just such a great interviewer, and Russo is just out of left field. And I'm a huge Russo guy. I like a little crazy in my sports talk analyst. I'm not looking. I hate it when people, especially when former players get in. I'm here to educate, bro. This ain't chemistry. I'm not looking to get a fucking education. I'm trying to laugh. I'm trying to have fun. I'm pissed off. I just lost $1,000 on the game. I want you to talk a little. You know what? Like, this ain't education. This isn't Spanish 3 here. No one's trying to get educated. This is all entertainment. And I think no one figured that out faster. I think why audio started lapping the written word, obviously society changed, but a lot of big J journalists, they're just very stuck in their ways. And I think when you start working in radio, and this has really benefited me being in podcasts, is when you're meeting with your your bosses and the people that matter, it's always about money. It's like, are we doing well enough? Are we generating enough sales? Are we doing well enough with revenue? Your job is to generate revenue. It's honestly, this is a sales job. That's what this is. And the ads happen to be what we're selling. And the bigger your audience is, the more money you make. But the reason Colin and Dan and now Portnoy and, the Pat McAfee, like, they can sell. And they're selling themselves. And that's why a lot of journalists have gotten really bitter over the last decade. It's like, hey, guys, this is all a business. The newspapers, do you know what that was? That was ad distribution. That's what that paper was, filled with articles written by you guys. But the reason they've been cutting for 20 years is less and less of us are reading them. And it's why I feel very fortunate to be in this medium where audio is as strong as ever, and it's only going to get stronger. It's obviously changed radio and streaming and podcasts, but you have a unique relationship when you listen to someone very closely. And I found this out just meeting some of you guys out and about. You feel like you know the guy really well. And I felt like that when I met Chris Russo. It's like, God, I've been listening to this guy for like 10 years. Well, the first time I met Colin, it's like, God, I've been listening to this guy since I was like 18 years old. I've never met Dan Patrick, but you just get to feel like you know the guy. It's why, in the history of the business, the Howard Sterns, the Rush Limbaughs, I mean, Mike and Mike, I mean, you're talking about people 20 years ago making $20 million a year because of the power of the business. And Russo, like I said, I think even if you don't like have a different opinion, I think he's it would probably be the two of them, but would be on the Mount Rushmore radio for sure. It's funny when I hear people talk about, like, I still listen to my radio from where I grew up. Like, I don't. I mean, I don't at all. Maybe it's just not that good. I used to work in the area, but depending on where you live, Philly's always had great sports talk radio. Same with New York. Same with Boston. I think on the West Coast, it's just podcast. It's kind of a little more progressive area in the sense of more, I would say, on per capita, more people are working from home, change the game. I think podcast more than the East Coast has destroyed West Coast radio. We're this close to crowning an NBA champ. And with the action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered every step of the way with same-game parlays, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more. Don't miss out as the NBA postseason winds down. It's super easy to just get started with DraftKings if you're a first-timer. Try betting on something like a team to win. Go to DraftKings Sportsbook app, select your team, and place your first bet. It's that simple. And if you're new to DraftKings, you got to check this out. New customers bet $5 to get $150 in bonus bets instantly. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use the code JOHN. That's code JOHN for new customers. Get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. Just a question for the pod. Love listening. What are your expectations for the Rams this season, and how long do you think their window to win a Super Bowl is? I think expectation is to compete to win the division and to be a Super Bowl contender. I mean, if Stafford's healthy all season, I don't see why they can't win 11, 12 games and be in the hunt in the NFC. Them, San Francisco, Lions, Green Bay, Philly. I mean, I think it's pretty clear who the big dogs are. I don't think there are many wild cards in the NFC. Been listening to your pod for about 3 years, and I like it. Love hearing your insights. Keep up the great work. Question for the pod. Appreciate the nice words, Aaron. What are your opinions on the Seattle GM John Schneider? Where do you rank him, and what would it mean for his career if this upcoming season with all the coaching changes turns out to be a success? Meaning, being a team that competes for a wild card spot. I think John Schneider is easily one of the better GMs in the league. I don't know him personally. I know a lot of people that are very close to him. I thought that when I worked in the league. I thought that when I worked in radio in the Bay Area and seeing his, the Richard Sherman teams. I thought that over the last 3 or 4 years as they've transitioned out of Russell Wilson. Now he's made bad moves, but I do believe that Pete Carroll has, like, I put Jamal Adams on Pete Carroll. I'm not saying John Schneider didn't like him or wasn't on board, but I don't know if that move happens if the front office is in charge. Pete was, and that's a debacle. But what he did to the Denver Broncos is an all-time fleecing. Now, obviously, Pete was involved in that too, but he gets credit. They always say buy low, sell high. He got Russell Wilson, and he was the reason, pounded the table, because Pete Carroll, and he told him, he said, Pete, when you meet this guy in person, you're going to be like, wait, this is the quarterback? Because he was really short. And Pete, if you ever looked at his USC teams, they were massive. Matt Leiner's huge. The team was enormous. Hell, the Seattle was huge, the guys they had on that team. And he sold Pete on it. So he bought NVIDIA at like $100. And then he sold Russell Wilson for a premium. It'd be like selling NVIDIA right now. That alone is an all-time move. And then I've really thought these last couple of years, our team's been really talented. Ton of really good guys on offense. Draft DK in the second round. Jackson Smith in the first round. The running back, Walker from Michigan State, stud. Drafting the offensive lineman when they pivoted from Russ. Defense has been a little hit or miss, but now they might have a better defensive coach in 2024. Obviously, Pete's one of the greatest defensive coaches in the history of the league. I don't know where exactly he ranks, but I think he's definitely, no doubt about it, top 10 GM in the league and just one of the more talented guys in the position over the last couple decades. People love him. People love the guy in the business. I've never heard a bad word about the guy. And we all know the longer you do something in an industry, especially a highly competitive industry, it's hard to not like, the guy's kind of a shady character, or God, he fucked me on that one. People like him. Thanks so much for the content every week. You have made me a better husband because I look forward to doing all the chores around the house. Just put my AirPods in and listen to some pods while doing the dishes. You know what's funny? Because sometimes we do this too. Like she'll be out watering. I'll be doing something in the house. We both have AirPods in. Is it pretty normal for couples nowadays to be in their own home, both having AirPods in, listen to something? You got a little true crime. I got a little golf podcast. And then when you need something, you're like, hey, Maria. And then she can kind of hear you. And then you're like, hey. And you're just kind of yelling at each other. When I grew up, you just screamed at everyone was just sitting right there. You had nothing to do, right? So it's like you're doing the dishes. You're just looking at your parents. They're staring at you, mad because you screwed something up, got yelled at because school called and said that you were late to 3 classes. Now everyone's just got their AirPods in 24/7, 365. Definitely makes, I even take sometimes my phone to the shower, put it on the ledge where it's not going to get wet and just play a podcast. I think I'm an audio addict. I consume a lot of audio, from book on tapes to just have YouTube audio going in the back or podcasts. Just a lot. I just constantly need audio in the back. Way easier to wash dishes, though, with AirPods in for sure. Being that I'm a diehard Trojan fan, I've followed this guy a lot the past 3 years. It seems very unlikely that he turns into a bust. In your opinion, what is his floor? Oh, my question is about Caleb. I would say his floor, I'm trying to think of like a talented physical player. It's a little shorter. I think his floor would be like some of the versions we saw of Russell Wilson. When the LOB changed and he kind of became this scramble around, make deep throws. But I think he's much more talented than Russ. He's bigger. He's probably not as fast. He's not slow. Maybe they're actually similar athletes. That sounds crazy, but I'd go Russell Wilson, Seattle. Because you couldn't say his floor is not like Josh Allen, right? That's a incredibly high floor. But his floor is not like some scrub. You wouldn't be like, Like Jimmy Garoppolo won a lot, but Caleb's floor should be higher, and he's never going to play like that. Like you look at like the Jimmy Garoppolos, the Derek Carrs, like that type play. Caleb's not going to look like that in the NFL because that's just not his style. So I think his floor does sound pretty high, but I can't really think of. I think his floor is incredibly high. I think it would be stunning if he's not really good. And if he's not really good, it's because ultimately, like you see Bryce Young in a game, like if he's not good, you understand it because he's tiny. Trevor Lawrence, you watch him and you go, okay, a lot of hype, but you're like, what does he do great? But even he's not living up to the hype, but he's still better than half the league. So it's just he's not living up to the hype because people thought he was going to be a top 5 quarterback, and instead he's like 14th, right? I think Caleb is better. If he becomes Trevor Lawrence, like underwhelms for the hype, I still think he's probably a better version of that. I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that. And I've actually tried to pump the brakes on his rookie season because I think we go overboard. Every rookie's just going to be CJ Stroud, and we know that doesn't happen. We know how hard it is. You can go on to be a legend, and just Peyton Manning, Eli Manning. I mean, these guys just, you watch the rookie season. Andrew Luck was an outlier. As a rookie, he was pretty damn good. Most rookies are up and down and a lot more down than up. So even if they go 8-9 and he throws 24 touchdowns and 14 picks, it's like, I bet he has moments throughout the year where you're like, oh my, this guy could be truly special. And part of being truly special is dependent. This is not basketball where it's kind of on you. It's really kind of on you. Like, can you become a star or not? It's usually not the coach that makes you a star. It's the player. Like Michael Jordan was Michael Jordan well before Phil Jackson ever showed up. Steph Curry was pretty freaking good before Steve Kerr ever arrived. So in football, like Mahomes was going to be good no matter what. I think we can all acknowledge that. But is he this without Andy Reid? Tom Brady said over and over, like, we needed each other. Who your coach is really, really matters. Is Eberflus good enough? And if he's not, if they miss the playoffs and fired him after this season, like, well, who do they bring in? Would they hire like Mike Vrabel? Is Mike Vrabel good for a quarterback? Ben Johnson doesn't seem like he ever wants to leave ever. Who's the next like Kyle Shanahan? Sean McVay. Does that guy exist? Because to be good, I would argue Peyton Manning's the only guy who's, after a while, it didn't even matter. Like Tony Dungy, I'm running the offense, buddy. Me and the O-line coach, Tom Moore, and Howard Mudd. Like, stay out of it. We run the offense. That's usually not the way it works. Andy Reid runs the offense, right? Belichick ran the team. Manning's an all-time outlier. Where I remember hearing stories when I was in the NFL, he'd be walking out to practice and he'd ask for the practice script from the offensive coordinator and he'd ask for a red pen and he'd go through and make changes before practice started on the field. That ain't normal. Usually you need help. And I think Caleb's going to need help. Maybe it's Shane Waldron. Maybe it's after everyone gets fired, they nail it. But if you don't, like you can be in the wilderness. Read the Steve Young book. It was pretty ugly. I mean, really ugly until Bill Walsh traded for him from Tampa Bay. Now, Tampa in the mid-'80s was, I mean, worse than any team in the league right now. I mean, they were a joke. But you go to Bill Walsh, Jerry Rice, you start winning MVPs and become a legend. Ask Patrick Mahomes what it's like to get drafted by Andy Reid. It's got to be just, I can't even imagine how often he thinks how lucky he is. Like, he knows it. He knows it. Because he's very, very lucky. And he's also deserving. Like, he controls a lot of his own destiny. But if your coach sucks, I don't know. You just never know. And I'm not trying to shit on Eberflus here, but a lot of people just acting like the Bears are going to be sweet. Like, I don't know, man. We sure their coaching staff's any good?